Welcome to the 45th episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today I am so excited, and I'm a little nervous, but nervous and excited is kind of the same thing. And I am having Stuart Scheller. You see him, well, this way. I don't know, this way. You see him right there. And I cannot believe this is actually happening, but it is. So I'm going to read you guys a little bit about Stuart, and then we're just going to get right into the questions. I'm going to try to get to as many of your comments that I can. And if I can't, then we definitely will follow up afterwards in the chat section with those comments. So I have been following his journey in the public eye since he put out his first video on social media, demanding more accountability of military leadership in conjunction with the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. He made a series of social media postings critical of the military planning for exit, many in uniform, which ultimately led to his discharge from active duty. And while he made a choice that I would not, his rationale behind why he did it and where he is now is fascinating, and I can't wait to hear more about it. And we're going to talk today a lot about how you on active duty and those out of the military can stand up and seek change in their respective areas and what we really can do to fix the military. So Stuart Scheller was born in Illinois and grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. He has spent the last 17 years in North Carolina near Camp Lejeune. He has a bachelor's degree of science in accounting from the University of Cincinnati. He also has a master's degree in military science from the Marine Corps University. And I love this part, he strongly believes that America is worth fighting for. He believes in the Constitution, the United States, democracy, and the power of people to make a difference in the world. He believes that the only way for evil to be defeated is for good people to take action. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. That was a good intro. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm first just going to start off with the question that I ask all my guests who have served in the military. And that question is, why did you join the Marine Corps?
I joined the Marine Corps similar to really all my actions. When I look back on my life, I want to be able to say that I made a difference, that it was a purpose-driven life, and that I leave a better product for my children or for the next generations. I believe, just like your intro said, in everything America stands for. But I don't think anything comes for free, and you got to put in the work and you got to fight for the things that you believe in. I joined the Marine Corps because I wanted to make a difference.
Right. And I think that is a lot of why people do join. I mean, sometimes they join also because they're in trouble or this is the route that they can take to make a difference and to feel like they're moving forward with their lives. Now, once you got into the Marine Corps, overall, what were some of the parts of the Marine Corps that you found that you were the most satisfied doing?
Being with the young Marines was the most satisfying thing. So like the best compliment you can get in the military is when one of your service members, so for me, it's a Marine, 5-10 years later reaches out and said, "Hey sir, you made a huge difference and here's how," right? Like that's what you should do it for. And so those little things always kind of gave me inspiration. After each tour, I was planning on getting out. And so literally up until about 12 years, it was like 4 or 5 different tours where I'm like, I'm getting out after this one. I'm getting out after this one. But there always seemed to be some thing that somebody said about how I impacted their life or made a difference. And it just kind of filled me with a sense of purpose. And going back to my motivations, that's what I wanted. Now, I didn't have fun in the military every single day. I think that's a dangerous word and it can be disingenuous. I've had commanders that are they make it so binary and they're like, if you're not happy, you should just get out. And I was like, well, it's more complicated than that. I have purpose every day, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm having fun every single day. There's days where I'm exhausted. There's days where I feel good. But I would say the consistent factor for me was that it was purpose-filled and I found contentment in being around the junior Marines.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the people is what I think brings all of us to it. But you're right. Day to day, there's a lot of struggles and there's a lot of things that we see in our respective areas that we want to fix and we can't because we're not the right rank or the system itself doesn't allow us. And so that's how we're going to transition into your story and how you got out. What was it along the way? Were there some consistent themes of things that you saw that bothered you and that angered you? And did that start to build up to a certain point?
Yeah, there's so many things. And I feel like I really do a good job in my book talking about the macro trends over the last 2 decades, and then tying that into the micro story of what I went through and how it kind of reinforces all those bigger trends. But ultimately, I'll start with the military's purpose is warfighting. Bottom line, bar none. It is to be an instrument of the nation to impose our will, a policy objective on a foreign nation. So if you've used diplomacy, information, economic, these other sources of power, and you can't get a foreign nation to do what you want, you have the option to use the military or the threat of military to compel that foreign nation, state, or non-state actor to do what you want them to do. And so that's the whole purpose of the military. And I feel like I got a little disenfranchised when I saw the warfighting focus drift in almost a backseat of importance. And, obviously we still train and do things that are warfighting related. But if you just itemize the hours that you spend in a given day as a staff officer or whatever, very few of them have to do with warfighting. And then you couple that with, in all branches, the promotion system is built on a subjective evaluation. And so all officers are singularly focused on impressing their boss. So if I, as a commander, have 5 subordinates, you would like to think that I rank them 1 through 5 based on their warfighting capability, but that's just not how it works. It's based on that given evaluation cycle, my personal interpretation of who's the best. And sometimes it has to do with warfighting. Sometimes it has to do with that guy didn't do his annual training, that guy's late, that guy talks back, and every commander says they want honest feedback, but that really is different for each person. And some people say they want honest feedback, and they really don't want honest feedback at all.
They don't.
If you send them at all, then you're going to be that 5 of 5, right? And you got to be emotionally intelligent enough to navigate that as a commander, or just as any member of the military that is using the fitness report or whatever the subjective evaluation is in your service. So. And the Navy, they literally write their own reports. They write it out and then hand it to you and say, just sign off on this. And so, so all this has created a people-pleasing initiative base that's not warfighting focused, that has allowed us to drift. We quite honestly haven't won a war since World War II. I mean, you could argue me on Korea. In my opinion, it was a stalemate. Vietnam was, I think we all agree, we didn't achieve the policy objectives. Iraq, Afghanistan, I would like to believe we all agree we didn't achieve the policy objectives. And then you just go through the smaller campaigns of whether it's Kosovo, Beirut, Somalia, Libya, Syria, the list goes on and on. And so where wars are won and lost is between the seam of the National Security Council and the combatant commander. Yet we consistently are talking about raising standards of the junior service member and retooling the junior service member. We're asset focused, and we're not doing a good job of identifying the true source of repeated failure. Let's look at Vietnam. The Marine Corps has got a great example. The Khe Sanh was this supposedly critical piece of terrain where thousands of people got killed or injured because it was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and it disrupted them. And we fought at Khe Sanh for, I don't even, off the top of my head, let's call it a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, still during the Vietnam campaign, we just decided it wasn't important anymore. And we went somewhere else. And Khe Sanh all of a sudden was irrelevant. And no one went back and said, hey, let's talk about the sacrifices at Khe Sanh. Generals, why was it important? And then why wasn't it? But what we did do after Vietnam was say, hey, drugs, draft, junior enlisted, bad to go, raise the standards, and that's going to fix all our future problems. We're doing the exact same thing now after Iraq and Afghanistan. The Marine Corps, hey, we got to mature the force. We need a more mature warfighter. What we're doing now can't win against China or Russia. And it's like, you guys didn't win the last 2 decades. None of you have been held accountable for your failures. And so it's just the same mantra over and over. Right. And so the original question was, why am I getting frustrated? Like, this was building in me when I went to Ramadi, when I went to Afghanistan, and I just saw us doing things that didn't make sense. And it wasn't in line with what the messages were in terms of accountability, in terms of warfighting. And then watching the reality and seeing the disparity, it was frustrating. And the punctuation mark of the Afghanistan evacuation, I mean, let's go through it real quickly. We conducted the withdrawal during the peak fighting season. Everyone that's been to Afghanistan knows the Taliban hides in the mountains of Pakistan. And instead of withdrawing from October to March, we decided to do it from April to September because of the bullshit September 11th date. We risked American lives. We risked American treasure. General McKenzie didn't have any internal fortitude to push back on Joe Biden, President Biden, when he decided to draw down from 2,500 to 650 troops. There's a historical case study that they don't teach in the military academies anymore. General Singlab, World War II vet, he was the commander of the Korean forces. when President Carter wanted to withdraw all the American forces out of Korea, Singlab said, hey, if you do that, Korea's going to go to a war and we're going to lose all the efforts that we've achieved. And he told him that privately. Carter heard him out and then said, no, I'm taking them all out. And then Singlab went public and he prevented Carter from doing that. It's like the same case study. But McKenzie doesn't do that. He draws down military troops and then he evacuates Bagram Air Base. And not only did he evacuate it, when he assigned General Sullivan to be the lead planner for the evacuation on 1 April, they planned on using Bagram all the way to the end of the June. It's in the investigation. You can read the statements. And so then at the end of June, unexpectedly, General McKenzie makes the decision to pull Bagram off the table, causes the planners to completely reset the plan 2 months before the evacuation. We leave 7,000 prisoners. We don't tell the Afghan National Security Force we're leaving. Taliban walks in, releases all the prisoners, probably releases the suicide bomber. Taliban walks into Kabul. General McKenzie, a day late and a dollar short, decides he's going to have to throw 5,000 troops at the problem. Obviously, we rely on the Taliban for external security. The Marines are getting multiple firefights with the Taliban. Meanwhile, General McKenzie's talking about what a great partner they are. Then, obviously, the Taliban lets a suicide bomber through. They kill 13 service members, hundreds of others. We conduct a drone strike in response, kill nothing but women and children. And then after that, General Donahue, the 82nd commander that shows up, takes a picture of himself walking to the bird as the last man in Afghanistan, like he's some hero after we surrendered to the Taliban and he got a bunch of people killed. And then the president, SecDef, and General McKenzie talk about what an overwhelming success the evacuation was. Like, if there's not a better example in military history of failure and just the disparity between what the military leaders try to tell you and what's actually happening, which we're intelligent enough to look at and say, that's a failure, brother. And so I know I'm making it long-winded, but that was catalyst for me being like, hey, we demand accountability. You preach accountability. This is a pretty clear-cut case where somebody should be saying we messed this up.
Right. And what I think you've alluded to in other broadcasts is that we get this like congressional hearing at the end, right? Whenever anybody screws up and something happens, Congress will put them in the hot seat. But what is it that you find when we have these congressmen asking questions, and then what has been your observation of that process?
I know you're setting me up because you've seen me rant on this before. So I made and I appreciate you setting me up, by the way. I made a post to violate my gag order. I did it very intentionally. It was thought out because I did it on a Saturday, knowing the generals were testifying to Congress on a Tuesday, Wednesday. And I thought that they would first of all, they didn't have the legal rights to send me to jail, but they lied on the documents and said it was a flight risk, which I was coming to work every day, put me in jail. But it was, I anticipated that. And my thought was the Congress, because the president doesn't hold generals accountable for tactical failure, because to do so reflects on his own inabilities as the commander in chief. Like, I challenge you to give me an example in history where the president has fired a general for tactical failure without going all the way back to like Abraham Lincoln. I mean, I can think of McChrystal, but that was because he talked trash about Obama. I can think of like MacArthur, but that's because he talked trash and disagreed with Truman, right? Like, there is no president that's willing to say, I failed and so did the general, but I'm not going to step down. I'm just going to fire the general. They just don't do that. So the only thing that's left is Congress, and their lever of control over the DOD is the budget. And so my goal when I went to jail was to just continue to apply pressure, illustrate the hypocrisy of the system, to force the Congress representatives to potentially use the budget as their lever of control. Well, they went through in their congressional testimony, and apolitically, both sides, sound bites of anger. We're so upset you failed.
Yep.
General McKenzie, why didn't you just leave enough troops in there to conduct the evacuation?
Yep.
I mean, and they nailed. There were some really good questions in there. The only question that they didn't ask that was smart to ask was when the decision was made to evacuate Bagram. That comes out in the investigation and never comes out in the congressional testimony. But other than that, they did a pretty good job of asking questions. But concurrently, not in the news, was they approved $750 billion, one of the largest DOD budgets, and not one of them went back and said, I think the stat is up to like $80 billion left in Afghanistan. Somebody checked the stats. I almost didn't believe it. But somebody sent me an article that said that. So like, let's just call it 10, somewhere between 10 and $80 billion of materials that are left there. If you're asking for $750 billion and I'm a Congress member, I'm going to take, let's just call it 80. I'm taking 80 billion out of that 750 billion you asked for. And you can figure it out, generals. Or, you know what? You want the whole 750 billion, Give me a list of people who should be fired over leaving that amount of equipment. Now, I'm a military officer. I've been doing this long enough. I get it. I understand that we leave gear in country because it's cheaper. And so, like, I acknowledge a savvy politician general can come back and say, all right, you don't want me to leave the 80 billion. Well, then I'm going to ship it back and it's going to cost 110 billion, right? So it's not always as simple as it is on the surface. And I acknowledge that. But we have to agree that a lot of that stuff was left in Afghanistan because of our terrible planning. Like, that's the bottom line. Like, that cannot be denied. So for the congressional representatives to then go back, not hold anyone accountable, not use the lever of the budget as any type of measure of control was very frustrating to me. And that's where it kind of opened my eyes. That it's like, because the military has its own justice system, so there is no third form of government to hold military generals accountable like there is in normal governmental agencies. Literally all we have is the executive and congressional branch, and they're not doing their job. And so that if we're expecting the 4-star generals to hold themselves accountable, I mean, look around. That's not happening. So really, they've just gone unchecked, and it's been frustrating.
It's not set up as a lever of accountability. So that would kind of go into my next question, which is, let's say we were to use the budget as a lever of accountability. Do you have an idea, or have you thought through what that would look like? Like, how could we use that budget? Like, what kind of stats, what kind of reports, what would you suggest on how that could be changed?
Yeah, I mean, so the budget is one issue, and then the whole procurement process is like a completely separate bad to go system. So if I was like in charge of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, or if I was a SecDef, first of all, we need to incentivize efficient spending. And so I can tell you, as a regimental OPSO, you get a regimental budget, right? We had 4 battalion commanders. And at the end of each quarter, we would look at the spending, and whoever hadn't spent enough money fast enough, we as the regiment would pull the money out and spend it on something else, or give it to another battalion commander that is spending faster and more recklessly. Like, no business in the world can operate on that form of ineptitude. And so $750 billion, quite honestly, you really only need $300 billion if you actually could put procedures in place that was efficient with money. But we've just allowed this wildly incompetent system. And so the first thing I would do as a representative or as a SecDef, I would incentivize smart spending. I would force commanders to have a budget that we don't take the money away. So if you save money, you get to save money, right?
You get to save money in
money. That's how you incentivize that. Taking away the money incentivizes reckless spending. So that's that's just common sense stuff. I mean,
marketing 101.
It is. It's basic stuff. And you know, these generals are supposed to be so smart, but it's like they just get to the top and they just accept the way the system is. And then you couple that with, you know, I've been banging on the drum that Austin, it was a former Raytheon board director, but people don't talk about, look at Mattis. Mattis went straight to General Dynamics, became the SecDef, went right back to General Dynamics. Like, it's criminal that they're doing this. And if I was the president, I would say, you may not be able to stop a private citizen once they retire to take these jobs, but you don't get a military retirement. You can choose, General. It's unethical. The reason they're hiring you is just to garner influence with the active duty generals. It's insider trading done legally. It's the ethical concerns are obvious. And so you have all this incestuous relationships in the oligopoly of firms that all impacts the budget. And so the whole thing is just corrupt, unethical, and is leading to wild inefficiencies. And it doesn't even take a genius to figure it out. Like, this is so common knowledge, but our leaders are just so demonstrated that they're unable or just don't care to change it.
And I think that it's also just because we all try to just do what we can in our lane and in our box to make an impact. And the stuff that you're talking about, it's so massive for any of us to put our arms around, right? Like we see it. I mean, it doesn't matter. I guarantee you there are 3 and 4 stars in our military that would agree with what you're saying 100%. But unfortunately, that system is what exists. It is the way we've always done it. And so go ahead. All right.
I fundamentally, like, you're right. I know you're right, but it angers me. Like,
I know
why we have a Secretary of Defense that after 100 days comes out and says the biggest threat facing the DOD is COVID. At that time, in April, May, when he made that comment, Russia had already staged all its forces on the border of Ukraine.
We were withdrawing from one of the largest campaigns, wars in American history. All these things I'm talking about, procurement, the budget. I mean, we could talk about education. I could go down the list of systemic problems in the military, and we put a guy in charge of the Department of Defense that comes out and says the biggest problem is COVID. Oh no, my secondary concern is extremism. It's I don't know if it's just complete ignorance or if it's like almost evil, but it's completely wrong, and it comes at the expense of the junior service member.
Right. And I think that the only thing that we're going to be able to do, like, how can people who are active duty, like myself, I can't take the stand, obviously, that you're able to take. And many of my colleagues, wouldn't even have this broadcast with you because of the way that they feel about these kinds of issues. And they agree with everything you're saying. They just know that they've put so much of their blood, sweat, and tears and their family life and everything else into this. And you took a stand that just, quite frankly, it just speaks so much to your character. And I want to, in fact, now I'm remembering, I want to also address something about a lot of people may have thought that you did this because you were already looking for an out. But I think now, after listening to you, though, it wasn't that you were looking for an out. It was that you were so fed up over things that you've been seeing for so many years. And then that was just sort of maybe the tipping point. Am I accurate in that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And it was really tough when so to the first part of your question, you were really just kind of talking and then you asked the question. But the first part was, it's so hard of a stand, right? I think because most people feel that way, to do that just on your principles is almost unheard of. And so it was easier for people to justify my actions through an extremist. He's leveraging another job on the outside. This is for political purposes. This is for financial purposes. Like every reason that could have been thrown out there was thrown out, except for I think he just like cares about the military and is like a principal. My own congressman came out and said, let's wait. There's still a lot more to this Stuart Scheller story that hasn't come out. Like nothing else came out. Like, are you going to go back and say you apologize? Like, no. And so I appreciate the question because it was really frustrating for me. And that's why I haven't allowed myself to quit, because I really want to show people that another argument was, and you kind of alluded to it, you just can't change it. This is the way it is. I think if we start subscribing to that, America's truly lost. And I don't subscribe to that. I do believe if everyone gets active, we can make this how we believe it should be created. That's how the founding fathers created flexibility in it. And we've drifted so far from the Constitution. I mean, in my letter of reprimand, my General Alford said, he said that I violated my solemn oath. And my response to him was, I think, I swear to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I feel I upheld that oath more than yourself and more than all the other field grade officers that were too scared to do what I did. I quoted the Declaration of Independence in one of my posts that talks about the American form of government. The power comes from the people, and that form of government no longer serves their interest. It's the people's responsibility to throw off that form of government. And people were calling me a violent extremist for quoting that. I mean, that's the foundational document. Literally, the Declaration of Independence created the framework for the Constitution. It is the foundational document of our government. And when I quote it, I'm considered a violent extremist. And that it really opened my eyes like,
Well, I think, what we're doing today and what we're modeling, especially me being on active duty. And like I was telling you in that text message, I'm still very much in the game. Like, I'm still hoping perhaps to compete for 06. I mean, I'm a commander. I've been in 26 years, and I can still have a podcast, and I can still have opinions, and I can still do the things that I want to do that are causes that speak to me. And so I think that's my next question is what is your advice for people who are on active duty that when they contact you and say, yeah, man, you may, okay, maybe it wasn't a dude that says it, but you know what I mean? Like, you did it, but I can't do it. What do you say to them?
Yeah, so good question. I would never recommend somebody publicly challenge the system without thoroughly thinking it through. So number one is never be emotional. Always try and use rational thought. But the other part of that is you got to understand people relate more to emotion than they do rational thought. So the real secret is wrapping your rational thought in emotion. And if you can figure out how to do that effectively, you can weaponize that a little bit. But if you're just emotional, which it's very hard to do. Like even in my situation, I tried to be very rational and use emotion as a broadcast mechanism. But there's admittedly times where I was just recklessly emotional because of all the pressure that was being levied upon me, and there was some missteps. And so for people that want to challenge the system, what I'll tell you is the best way to do that is to change the system from within. It's the bottom line. But I came to the conclusion that there was no way to change the system from within as I was caught in my middle management position. And that time was of the essence. America has a short-term memory, and that on the day where the suicide attack happened, there needed to be a call from the actual service members of accountability to our senior leaders. And so I weighed that with the potential ramifications, and I decided that it was worth it. And so I think each person needs to decide what their personal values are before a time of conflict, because if you haven't decided what your values are before a time of conflict, fear will drive your decision process. And the more you think about it, the more fear kind of sets in. You can just see someone like they think, and then they just don't do anything about it because they've overthought it. And so that's what helped me is I defined what my values were, and in that moment, it felt right to me.
And you knew by doing it in uniform, because we both know, Stuart, had you done that in civilian clothes, I don't think the same outcome would have happened. And so
the thing, like people in the beginning, they were counseling me on that. Well, maybe if you wouldn't have done it in clothes, but they misunderstood my purpose. My purpose wasn't to save my job. My purpose was to get the message out as far as I could.
And you knew by doing it in uniform, you would.
And yeah, exactly right. In my office, in my uniform, describing my name and rank was the way to get the message out there in the most impactful meeting. So all the advice I got on how I could have helped myself a little bit, I think it was just a misdiagnosis of what my intentions were.
I agree. I completely agree. I never thought about it like that, but you're right. You had this thought in your mind that this was what you were going to do. And if you wanted to build the following and get heard as loudly, not as loudly, but have the most impact that you could, you had to do it that way. And that was the only thing to do. I mean, like you say, I don't think this is your stand, and the decisions that you made are for everyone. They're not for me. But I do believe that you took the stand that was right for you. And now let's transition to where you are today and what's happening, now that you've taken the stand. You got discharged. I believe it was around December 24th. And then, which I thought was interesting given the day, but so give us a little bit of a snapshot of what things have been like since then.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was on a gag order all the way up until Christmas Eve. So it was very hard. Like we talked about all those stories that people were telling about me. I had to listen to them and just kind of let people beat up on me. So I violated the gag order a couple times up through end of September. But if you go back and look, I didn't make a single comment for 3 months. Right?
I remember.
At a certain point, I realized further comments, the return on investment wasn't there. And at that point, I was going to get dishonorable. I was going to go to jail for a while. And I was just I need to now just write it out. So I exercised tactical patience. I waited it out for 3 months. And then when I got out in January, right after the holiday season, I hit the media hard so that I could tell my side of the story. I got on a bunch of big shows, a ton of podcasts.
Yeah, Jocko was one of them
earlier, but you got sent to Ukraine or got.
I know. Yes, I got sent to UCOM to help with the Russia-Ukraine problem.
That's why I'm doing this one a little bit offset. But you've been in contact with me, and so I did. My goal was to do as much media as possible. I'm going to talk to anyone that wants to talk to me from January through February, and then I'm going to hard stop and write a book. And I was effective in the January through February. I mean, every day I had I was booked up solid. But Ukraine, Russia happened right there end of February, beginning of March. And so some of the news broadcasts kind of pulled me back in. So I was in the news a little bit longer than I wanted to. And then I wrote the book in 6 weeks. A lot of people are like, wow, that's fast. But you got to understand, I was journaling every day. I did 2 months of podcasts where I just told the story over and over. And so, and also I'm going through a divorce and I didn't have a job. So I was in a condo by myself. And so isolation and discipline really are the secret recipe to writing a book. And so I banged it out in 6 weeks. And that really brings us to now. We're a month after, so that was mid-April. And so now I have got a lull. The book comes out September 6th. And so I'll probably in mid-August have to go back into the media and get back on the tour. And that'll take me through the next holiday season. And so right now I find myself, I've got like 3 months of a lull where what I've chosen to do is go support political candidates in this 22 cycle. I've been all over the country, Ohio, Texas. I just got back from New Hampshire last week. And I'm trying to basically find my platform is courage. I want people, like we talked about how Congress didn't have the courage to use the DOD as a budget. I mean, I've been using these talking points over and over, and the people that I'm endorsing, I'm definitely saying it in front of them. And I think if you plant enough seeds, like I'm going to get at least 6 or 7 votes of people that I've endorsed. That doesn't mean they're like loyal to me, right? But I do think I've got at least a phone call to them and some WASTA and some ideas that I'm planting, and hopefully we can start to get this thing back on track.
Wonderful. So your book is called Crisis of Command. You can pre-order it on Amazon. I did link to Stuart's website at the end and in the show notes. So please go to his website. You'll see it. I think it's right there on the front page. But I really look forward to reading it. And so now that you're going to be, you're supporting these candidates, is your intention, and I know everyone asks you this and you know what question's coming next, perhaps after some time, to run yourself?
Yeah. So like I said, I'm promoting the book through the holiday season. And then after the holiday season, it's like you come up for air and you assess the battlefield. And so all the political candidates, they all have teams. All those teams will be looking for candidates after the holiday season. And if I'm going to run, I'll make that decision in January 23. But I'm not sure. I quite honestly not sure. Like I did 8 town halls in like 3 days with Don Bolduc, a former 1-star general, and he's running for Senate in New Hampshire. And you watch these guys, these politicians, and Don is just like such a contagious personality, smiling, talks to everyone. And after like 8 conversations, I'm like, I just don't want to talk to people anymore. Like, get away from me. So I don't know. I don't know if for 2 years I can just go room to room and pretend to like talk to people. I think I'm maybe too introverted or just that. So I've got a couple business ideas, and there's ways that in the shadows I can continue to build a platform, but I don't know. I may run for politics because quite honestly, what I'm interested in is foreign diplomacy, getting the military on track, and politics is the best way to do that. And so because I'm so passionate about that, I might just suck it up and, try and act like a politician for the reasons that we're talking about. So that's where I'm at.
I love it. Well, I definitely will be following you very closely, as the years go by, because I do believe that you did something that, quite frankly, I just never saw anybody else do in the military. And I think it means a lot. And as I was telling you earlier before the call, so many people who would have never supported you and would have never been interested in us having this conversation. It's almost like, I think, meant to be that I didn't do it back in February, March. And just to be transparent with everyone, I was very nervous about doing this call because I was going to go and work at the unit that's responding to some of these issues that Stu was at the time going all over the media and talking about. And I was like, oh, shoot, like that, and gradually I have some wonderful mentors, who are active duty themselves, senior to me, and they encouraged me to do this call with you. And so that to me just spoke volumes about your work and what it is that you're doing. And so I really don't think I have a whole lot of.
I'll tell.
Go ahead.
What you just said there made me think of something. And your point was over time, people are starting to kind of see it in a new light. And part of that is me just getting out and telling my side of the story. But so I don't know, 3 days ago, I was in New Hampshire and I got recognized on the New Hampshire Congress floor. And one of the state representatives for New Hampshire, he's I don't know if he's retired. He was a Marine First Sergeant. And so I was with the Senate candidate, Don Bolduc, and Don introduced him to me. And he said, "Hey, sir, former Marine myself, really appreciate the stance you took. But when I put my First Sergeant hat on, I can't agree with the method, right? I can't agree with the way in which you did it." And I was like, "Hey, man, we're all entitled to our own opinions. I really appreciate you actually coming up and shaking my hand and being man enough to say that to my face." But I kind of came back at him and I was like, "Hey, I got a question for you. Like, with your First Sergeant hat on, if somebody was dying and you had to break the rules to save their life, would you do it?" And And he kind of like sat back and thought about it. And he almost approached it like a rhetorical question, but so that I kind of answered my own question. I was like, hey, brother, over time, this thing is not going to get right. Like, you're not going to bring those 13 service members back. You're not going to bring the 100 people that were killed in the gate back. You're not going to bring all those people that we killed in the drone strike back. But what we're talking about is the future for us. We've demonstrated that we've repeated the same mistakes over and over. And if no one is willing to get a loud enough voice to apply enough pressure on this system, then it's going to continue to do the same thing, and people are going to die. So if I had to break the rules to bring attention to this problem that we have, this systemic problem, then I'm okay with that. And I think I convinced him. I think that was like one small win. And he was like, all right. And then we kind of hugged it out. I guess that's my thing. Like, yes, and I've said the whole time, yes, I broke the rules. Yes, I should have been held accountable. Yes, I pled guilty to 5 charges at whatever it was, special court martial. But none of them was a false official statement, right? No one can say what I said, and all of those was untrue. And so hopefully the people like you that stay in the military, the great officers that we need, there's still a ton of great people. There's so many good people in the military. Everything I did was for the love of military, to make the military better. And, I'm rooting for you guys.
Well, I appreciate that, Stuart. And we're rooting for you too. And I'm going to do everything I can on my end to continue to support you and to push for the changes that you have put such front and center and such a spotlight on. It's so refreshing, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been seeing the same things that you've been seeing for years and years and years, especially with procurement, with the terrible way that we evaluate leaders and the biases that go into that. I mean, I saw so many of the same things, and so did so many other people. And so for you to put a voice to that, I think meant a lot to a lot of us. So I will do whatever I can going forward, as I have, to continue to support you. And it's been nice. I'm also in touch with your mom and dad, so that's been neat too. Because that's I guess maybe I'll close with that, because that's a nice family thing. Many of you might have seen too that when Stuart was in the brig, his parents went on total media offensive. I mean, it was incredible to watch the way your mom and dad went to bat for you and stood up for you. And they were not public figures before any of this. And they did that. And so I just want to know, what did that mean to you to have that kind of support in your corner as you were going through such a difficult time?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of our generation. We've been at war for so long. Quite honestly, I haven't had much of a relationship with my parents for 17 years. You maybe see them at a Christmas, maybe see them at a funeral. I'm not a big phone guy, so some people may call their parents once a week. I'm maybe good for one a month, and so quite honestly, I just haven't had much of a relationship with them, and that's kind of sad. But the way that they knew, and the one time that I needed help, they just showed up with the unsolicited and just jumped into the spotlight when I needed them. That's what you want from a parent, right? The safety net that, when you're a 17-year warrior, you don't need your parents, you're too cool, then all of a sudden you do. And they showed up and just showed how much they loved and cared for me, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, it was really heartwarming to see that. All right, is there anything else that you want to put out to my audience?
I'll end with the book. Crisis of Command comes out. I know we already talked about it, but all these things that we've been talking about, these systemic issues, I feel like I am very objective in my way that we can improve the military. I end with 13 points, do these 13 things now. And it has nothing to do with the biggest threat facing the DoD is COVID. There are real problems facing the DoD. And quite honestly, the book is, in a lot of ways, it's really refreshing, because any person of our experiences retires and they need to have a DoD reviewed. The DoD went out of their way to ostracize and cut all ties with me, but in doing so, now I don't have to have my book DoD reviewed, and I can say whatever I want to say. And so I believe that they will be second guessing that decision. But quite honestly, again, I'm not trying to be vindictive. I'm really trying to make the military better, and I think the book is really good. It's got a good micro story that pulls the reader through, but it really has a good objective analysis.
Awesome. All right, Stuart, just hang out for a second. I just want to say goodbye after we go offline. I do want to say I'm so sorry that I did not get to any of the comments. I had a feeling this might happen just because I was going to be very focused on Stuart's story. So I think there was maybe one question there from Scott, the thoughts on the FD 2030 I don't even, but I'll get to that later. Or Stu, you can answer that now, or I can
I can answer that. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I just wrote an op-ed, and they're going to publish it in the Marine Corps Times in response to that. FD 2030 is right now. You got a bunch of retired generals that are talking against it.
What is it?
It's General Berger's force design for how he's going to mature the force. So I was talking about like how after Vietnam we blamed it on the junior enlisted. It's General Berger's way of saying we got to focus on the junior enlisted.
Okay.
But the truth is, we don't know what the next war is. The truth of a military is being adaptable. And so anyone trying to predict the next campaign I'll show you someone that's full of shit. And so the retired generals that are all attacking General Berger, they don't know what they're talking about, quite honestly. And neither does General Berger. We all have to be flexible and adaptable. The reason the conversation is misguided, and what my op-ed article that's going to come out here soon is about, is the hidden fact underneath all of that conversation is none of those generals have won a war, not a single one. And so they're all acting like they're the subject matter experts, but it's all coming from a place where the war is won and lost between the seam of the National Security Council and the four-star commanding commander, and all these generals with opinions on the tactical layout of the force haven't actually won a war. And so what we need is, like, after World War I, there was a guy named George Marshall who was the Secretary of the Army and just cleaned house of general officers, which allowed the ascension of Eisenhower, which in many ways enabled the victory of World War II. We don't need a debate on FD 2030. What we need is a George Marshall to come up and clean up the general officer class.
And on that note, I would love to continue this conversation with you. Maybe when you have your book out or at some later time, we will definitely stay in touch. I want to thank all of you who joined us live tonight. As you know, this broadcast is recorded and will be uploaded later. And just enjoy the rest of your weekend and have a great night, guys. Thanks, Stuart.